Bars Ankle High. This is episode 64. Holy moly. Welcome to November.
I can't even believe it.
I know. November 2nd. Dun, dun, dun.
Hopefully, unless something changes.
Nothing will fucking change in this schedule, Garrett.
Okay.
It is on the sheet. And that's the rules. All right. So, recap. The last two episodes, we talked about Pennhurst State School and Hospital. Used to be called the Eastern Pennsylvania Hospital or School for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. Series of horrible events perpetuated by itself and the people in charge, including racists and eugenicists, who were worried about, quote, feeble-minded women being sexual predators, apparently, and wanting to spread their seed across this great land of ours. So, as we talked about in the last episode, Pennhurst closed officially in 1987, December 9th, 1987. The worst day of 1987, I would say. The best being the day afterwards when I was born. But now, as we mentioned, the different parts of the facility were carved up and are passed over to different owners here and there. But the primary campus that remains intact in the form of the buildings as they existed when Pennhurst was operational is owned by a private owner who also now runs ghost tours. And in October, there is a haunted house feature that is also run in a part of the structures and tunnels of the property. We know the treatment of the residents was horrible. Do you believe in ghosts?
I don't know. Like, I think so. I don't know.
I'm Katie.
I'm Garrett. How on brand for us to just barrel on through.
This is the Bars Ankle High.
Katie's like, what is the meaning of life? Also, I'm Katie. Yes, this is the Bars Ankle High. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I very much believe it, and other times I'm like, I just think there's so much bullshit, and I think people lie about it a lot.
Yeah, so I believe that ghosts are real. I think that there is an afterlife. I think there's also like an in-between realm. Same reason that I believe that aliens are real. I think that there's just too many stories for it to be fully fake.
It's like old news now, but that guy's like testifying before Congress on that whistleblower with UFOs.
Oh yeah,
it's fucking nuts. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
aliens. I believe in.
It's the same. I mean, it's the reason I can't really call myself a full atheist, because I think also, for every culture on the planet to have some sort of deity,
mm-hmm.
I just can't chalk it up to there being nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I also believe in ghosts, and I think that there are enough stories where it's like, it's just the unexplained that
mm-hmm.
it's like there isn't a way to explain how I can lose my keys and know that I had put them in my purse, and I put my purse on the couch, and that was it. And that's where it stayed all night. And then the next morning I go to get my keys to go to my car, and the keys aren't there, and I tear apart my house, and then they turn up like in the middle of the dining table where like they couldn't have possibly gotten, like those types of stories that are just like unexplainable.
Did you see that show that Netflix did like a mini series where they talked about all like different components of this? Like they talked to people who worked in hospice care, and they talked to like people who claimed they had lived like a previous life. A lot of people who had near-death experiences. It was crazy.
Yeah, the past life experiences are wild. There was a woman in Europe who believed that she was reincarnated Anne Frank and like had all these independent memories, had memories of the camp that Anne Frank was ultimately like sent to when she was captured. And then once she turned like 15, stopped having those memories, which is how old Anne Frank was when she was killed by the Nazis. So it's just wild. That was covered in an episode of And That's Why We Drink. And it was just like, it was the kind of thing where like people were like, didn't you just read her diary? Like whatever. But then you have these people who like knew, like, I think this woman met Anne Frank's cousin or aunt or something. It wasn't her father, but it was somebody else. And that person was like swearing up and down, like, no, that's her. And
that's so wild.
So like you have those types of accounts where people are like, oh no, that's fully that person. And that was, I think it was you who was telling me this, but that happened to Jim Carrey.
Oh, Jim Carrey. Yeah.
When he was doing Man in the Moon, and had this like experience where he was like possessed basically by energy or spirit or whatever, and had these conversations with his best friend. And so I just think that there's so many different stories that there's just no way that it can't be real in some level. But I do think that it's also very easy, especially in the age of like creepypastas and like, you know, Photoshop, to fake some stuff, which is what I was watching some stuff this morning before we recorded, and PK had exactly zero interest. And so like that's why I asked him if he believed in it. He was like, no, because it's just somebody in the other room going, ooh.
I do have like a cute one that happened recently to me. We were going to we were like out doing stuff, which I infrequently leave the house these days. So we were actually out of the house doing things, and we were near where my grandmother is buried, and I had not yet gone to where she's buried. So we're on our way there, and I was like, oh shit, I don't have like flowers or anything to leave. And I felt bad. I was like, we'll see a price shop or something on the way. We'll see something and we can stop. We just saw nothing. So I'm like, oh shit. Like, I'm like, should I pull over and like pick some flowers on the side of the road? I just feel like I had to leave something.
Yeah.
And we are literally like 2 minutes away, and there is a house that had a super long driveway, and at the end of the driveway they had a little stand set up, and it said free, and it was little bundles of flowers from their garden.
Oh my goodness.
Which they did because they have a close proximity to this big cemetery. And I saw it and I was like, oh my God, we have to turn around. My spouse was like, yeah, it didn't say free. Like you must be seeing things. And I was like, no, I'm telling you, it said free.
I'm pregnant, not illiterate. Like, what the hell?
I can read. So we turned around and we pulled up to the thing, and sure enough, and her favorite flowers were daisies, and one of them had a whole bunch of daisies in it. Aww. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool that it was just this like random thing that I feel like she was probably like giggling about.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So and also very flowers. Like a grandma thing, like, don't worry about like buying me flowers. Right. You know, like, so kind of like orchestrating stuff like that.
I also would have been annoyed if I paid like $20 for flowers and then saw free flowers that were cuter.
Also that.
2 minutes away.
Yeah, you got organic flowers now.
So like things like that happen, and I do think to myself like, I wonder.
Yeah, no, I fully and when my grandmother was in hospice, she would like have these whole conversations with people who weren't there. And I've heard stories that happens frequently in hospice, the closer that people are getting to death. And you could say like, well, it's because they're dehydrated and they're drifting away. But I also think that, you know, there's something to be said for, you know, somebody comes to get you and bring you to where you're supposed to be. And yeah, so it's just stuff like that where, you know, and those little things where it's like, you know, I'm, you know, if I'm thinking about my grandma or my grandpa and then I see something that's like very them.
Yes.
It's kind of like just like a little wink from the universe. But yeah, so I do believe in it. There's some stuff like even in watching some of the stuff that I'll talk about today, there's sometimes where they like replay the EVPs and it's like enhanced audio, and it's like and they have like subtitles, and I was like, that wasn't words, that was just
There's like one day I hope they get me being like you're welcome. Can't wait to haunt everybody.
Ghosty buttholes.
I do threaten to haunt people a lot for somebody who's on the fence.
I don't know why you would call it a threat when it is surely a promise.
Fair point.
So yeah, as I mentioned, I think it was in our first Pennhurst episode, there were, you know, residents who bit the staff would have their teeth removed by the Pennhurst dentist. There was also apparently constant sexual abuse between patients and between staff and patients. The problem arose from the fact that there was not a distinguishment between mental illness and developmental disabilities. Bill Baldini was interviewed by a couple of the different groups that investigated that I watched the episodes of. I watched Destination Fear, Ghost Adventures, Weird New Jersey had a website page about it. And then there was this other documentary that I'll get to that was on A&E. It was behind a paywall, so I do have like 19 different alerts to cancel my free trial. But
and don't be like me where you opt for the ad version even though it's a free trial and you're not paying for it.
Yeah, I was pretty pissed that there were still ads.
Right, like what difference does it make, Annie?
Right, honestly, for $25, whatever, it doesn't matter. But so Bill Baldini was interviewed in one of the episodes I watched, and he said, you know, you have someone who's a kid, and he said pyromaniac, but I think it could have also applied to like ADHD. You have a kid with ADHD who has an IQ of 110 and would still be sent to Pennhurst and housed with people who have IQs of 50 or less. That person becomes a predator because they're instantly around these people. And as I mentioned before, there was no separation between the ages. So you can have, even if you have somebody as a minor, somebody who's 16 around a 6-year-old. And again, you're in this situation that breeds, you know, abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, psychological, or emotional.
And how many of these people were targeted also?
Targeted, and like you're learning it because you're seeing the people who are older than you or potentially in charge doing it.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just, again, it's the kind of thing like I cannot possibly hold anybody who is a resident of Pennhurst responsible for what they did, because I think, you know, it's that I said it last time, but it's like that Lord of the Flies thing. Like, what do you expect? What do you like? This is what happens when you put people in this sort of situation, and then you don't give them any education. So the only thing that they are learning is how to be a predator and how to bully and how to abuse. So,
it's like just a survival of the fittest.
Right. Exactly.
Situation. Yeah.
So there's been EVPs, which are electronic voice phenomena, which if you watch a ghost hunting show, it's that thing where they will like replay the audio where they don't hear it in real time. So they'll have like a recording of it and they have to listen to it back again. And that's when they'll hear it because it's captured on the recording, but they don't hear it in real time. So they have EVPs of people saying, go away, I'll kill you, we're upset, why'd you come here? As well as a recording of a male voice saying, I'm scared, while a female voice says, why won't you leave?
Ooh, I hate that information.
There's also a building called the Quaker Building. It was one of the first buildings erected on the property. And I guess held some of the most violent and difficult to treat patients.
The irony of calling it the Quaker Building.
I know, right? And also grain of salt based on what we learned in the last 2 episodes as far as like what difficult to treat or violent meant. You know, it's possible that they were violent because they were being abused and neglected. But anyway, that's the information I have. The point is, in the Quaker Building, there's been several reports of shadows that manifest and dissipate without explanation, including a small female child with long black hair, like a la Samara, I think, is like the vibe I was getting, which is horrifying. a hunched over presence with long dangling arms.
Oh, don't like that.
And torsos and upper halves of bodies looking over or around obstacles. So like peering out from behind a corner.
We also don't like that.
Yeah. Also, doors and rocking chairs have moved without anybody being near them. One investigator was shoved on a stairway hard enough that they had a dark red mark left on their back.
I remember that in Ghost Hunters one time. They were in, because I used to watch that show all the time. And that one, it was like grain of salt, because they would make an attempt to disprove. They weren't going into it with the assumption that somebody who was saying their house was haunted was telling the truth. It was that there's something else that's going on. And there was they were in an old church that somebody had converted to a house.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept saying there was this like malignant presence of an old priest that had lived there. And one of the guys was walking through and was like struck on the back and had a big red, like burned handprint on his back.
Jesus.
It was wild.
That always gets me in any of these things where somebody ends up with like a scratch or
don't touch me.
Yeah, or like they're slapped or whatever, and like you can actually see the handprint or the scratch marks. Because it's not just like, oh, I feel somebody touching me, because I feel like that's so like,
I feel a cold breeze.
12-year-old girls at a sleepover with a Ouija board for the first time, like, oh, it's moving on its own. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So, but also, this one investigator was shoved down the stairway. One investigator had scratch marks on their upper arm without bumping into anything or being next to anything when the scratch marks appeared. Also, reports of objects being thrown in the basement, like a crowbar and a brass fixture, and like various other things. So like heavy stuff. And a medium that was brought to to Pennhurst by Weird New Jersey said that she felt multiple energies in the Quaker building, including either a demonic force or a past life of somebody who, quote, wasn't a very nice person.
Cool. That's great. That's good.
So one of the shows I watched was Destination Fear. And have you ever watched that one?
No.
I think you'd like it. It was kind of interesting. This was season 1, episode 10. It was the last episode of the season. And they were 4 friends. It was a brother and sister and then 2 of their friends. And they went on this road trip and went to these different haunted places.
Is it a reality show?
I mean, these all kind of are, I guess.
Oh, yeah. I see what you mean. Destination Fear?
Destination Fear, yeah. I watched it on HBO. But so their thing is like they'll investigate as a foursome, and then they split up into 2s, and then they split up into singles, and they sleep there. They like get a cot and sleep in their like designated spot.
No, man.
So yeah, and then they like have a static camera filming them as they're sleeping and whatever. So in this episode, one of the people was describing Pennhurst and the history of it and said, whatever bad thing you can think of that was done to patients, this place did it first. They met with somebody who was a member of the Pennhurst Memorial Society. She was actually co-president, Jean Searle. And Jean was actually institutionalized at a different institution that was similar to Pennhurst. And honestly, in her interview, she sounded like she just had like hearing loss or partial deafness. And by that,
Which
I just mean
cause a behavioral issue when you're a kid.
Right. And I just mean like she spoke with kind of a speech impediment, but she was completely understandable. There was nothing like otherwise was fine. Like there was nothing else about her. She was walking around. It was like whatever. So she was describing, though, the treatment that she had when she was institutionalized. And she said that you had to do what they told you to do or you would get punished. She told stories of being restrained with those like heavy duty leather straps around her wrists. And they would tighten them so tight that you'd like lose circulation in your hands. But then they would also tie your arms behind your back so you like couldn't move and like tie those to the bed. Yes. So the team went in and they set up a motion activated music box in one of the rooms. So it was the kind of music box that like would have belonged in like a jewelry box when we were kids. Like it had a crank on it. They set it up and walked away and it was immediately set off and started playing.
Oh no. Nope.
and they had a camera on it, so like you could see no one was near it and the crank was moving. And so they were like talking to it and they're like, oh, are you trying to play the music box? You can play it if you want. And then it like kept moving and it was just fucking wild. They went back to the building later on with just 2 of them, and when they walked up to the 3rd floor, the music box started going off again. And then they were able to get, quote, intelligent responses from the spirit, which is when you can like ask a question and get a response to your question. So they said to make 1 noise for yes, 2 noises for no. So it would be like 2 cranks worth for a no and 1 for a yes. And so they were like asking questions. So on that floor, they were told that there's a male spirit that does not like dealing with men. So it was a guy and a girl that went up there with just the 2 of them. And the guy was like, do you want us here? And it cranked twice. And guy said, do you want just me to leave? And it cranked once. And he said, should I be afraid of you? And it cranked once.
No.
And he's like, should we leave now? Or should I be afraid? Or something else, like basically telling the male investigator to leave and he should be afraid to be there. But it was like giving intelligent responses. And again, like it was all on camera because they had this like close-up view of it where they didn't have to get close to the thing at all for it to go off. So it was just like, ooh, it was so gross.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah, it was super unsettling, honestly. In the Devon building, they used this device called the Ovulus 4. It's like an EVP reader, but it displays the word on a digital screen that is being said by the ghost, and then it says it in Microsoft's SAM voice, so like in real time. So you can see and hear what is being said, and it doesn't sound like just static. M, the co-host of And That's Why We Drink, does a way better job of explaining how it works because they have a background in doing ghost hunts. Like they used to do ghost hunting tours when they lived in Virginia at some point. But that's basically what it does. So they were using the Ovulus 4 and they caught whistling in real time. Like they could hear it as they were walking around.
Nope.
And they were talking about it and they were like, oh my God, was that whistling? And then there was knocking on a bathroom stall standing next to where they were like saying like, did you hear that whistling? And then there was like knocking right next to the girl's head. And then later on they caught the whistling on camera again. So of the 4 people that were doing this Destination Fear experiment or whatever, Dakota, the main host, and a friend of his, I don't know his name, they had gone to Pennhurst 4 years earlier before they filmed this episode, and where like the friend of his was like, this is the place. Like he was like, yeah, I've been here before. Like it's crazy. Like I had nightmares for months after this, like after coming here, blah, blah, blah. And so when they like split up where they were going to sleep alone for the night, this friend ended up having to be alone in the tunnels. And so he's in the tunnels and doing like this independent little investigation on his cot.
Not a chance.
Oh, I know. Like also completely in the dark. Like there's no lights.
No. Oh, no. No.
So he's in the tunnels doing this investigation. And he says, what is your name? And then got an EVP, like, or a response that he recorded and like played it back to himself. He got a response saying, remember your nightmare. And he was like, I know.
I hate that.
It was the worst. I was like, oh my God. Like what though? What if it remembers him from 4 years prior?
I fucking hate that.
Yeah, and they never elaborated on it. I was like, my brother in Christ, you need to explain what your nightmares were.
Actually, you know what? Don't tell me. Tell me nothing. Because I don't want it in my brain.
Yeah, it was wild.
Shit.
And he's like, oh, this place is messing with my head. And I was like, it's gonna mess with your body soon. I'm like, they're not fucking around. Yeah.
Oh,
and so
God.
as they were leaving in the morning, Dakota was giving like a quick summation, like, oh, it's morning, you know, the sun's out, and blah, blah, blah. And then there was a huge crash, like you could hear it. And so it's not just, you know, nighttime noises.
No, I'd be Forrest Gumping my way right out. I'd be just sprinting. The sun's coming up. I'm out of here.
So then I watched, this is the one that was behind the paywall. It's called The World's Biggest Ghost Hunt, Pennhurst Asylum. I could only find it on A&E or through some other paid subscription services. So I watched it on the Philo app. Philo. And like I said, I even wrote it here. I set like 9 different alarms, so I remember to cancel my trial.
This is still an ADHD podcast.
Yeah, so word of caution on that one. So in this show, there were 5 paranormal investigators that were living in Pennhurst for 2 full weeks, recording their interactions. They had like a tent, like a huge tent outside of the buildings.
I don't have this kind of commitment to literally anything. There's
well,
nothing.
You have it to this podcast.
I'm not sleeping in a spooky place for 2 weeks.
I know, right?
Or one night.
So one of the people on the team was named Allie and identified herself as a sensitive and an empath. It's basically like being a medium, kind of, was like how she, what, like the different things she said, I would have described it as like being a medium, but she said sensitive. But regardless, in one room, a guy was listening to the EMF reader in real time with headphones on while the other guy was asking questions. So the guy who was listening to the EMF responses couldn't hear the questions that the guy was asking, and would just say the word as he heard it through the headphones. So they were having a whole conversation with this person who said, when I was initially watching it, it was like, I thought the spirit was saying that his name was Jim. But then at one point, this Jim character said, "Get ready." And I wrote, nope. "Commence shitting thine pants."
Yeah, no. No.
But they talked about Jim, when he was talking about Jim, and it was like, "Oh, do you know Jim? How do you know Jim?" And he said, "Friends." And just remember that, because we'll come back to that later.
Oh, good. Great.
It's not bad, I promise. So they explored also like the grounds around the buildings, and they used something called an SLS camera. It's a thing, like it has a screen on it, and it supposedly tracks the shapes of unseen figures and shows them on a screen. So if there's
like heat signature?
No. It's like, it looked like when they were making Lord of the Rings, and they had the actor that played Smeagol in that green screen suit with all the ping pong balls on it, kind of looked like that. Yes. Like it was like a stick figure with these like balls, and it almost like joints, like it would show on the screen. So I don't know, like they said like, "Oh, it looks like it's crouching behind here." And one of the people on the team was a geologist, and he was like, "I mean, couldn't that have just been like a bush that was blowing in the wind?" And like this was like picking up the movement of the bush.
I'm no scientist, but couldn't that be a bush?
So I don't know, like that was one of those things where I was like, I'm really skeptical of that. But they used it later on, and I'll explain why maybe there was a little bit more veracity to the tool later on. But at least when it was outside, it looked like, if it was a crouching figure, it looked like it was crouching behind this like brick thing that like today I would say is like a built-in outdoor grill area at somebody's house. But I'm almost certain that Pennhurst did not have barbecue facilities. So
I want nothing to do with anything that crouches.
Yeah, also that. So yeah, I went to a haunted corn maze one year in college, as a date thing, like a double or triple date. And somebody was all in black crawling on the ground behind us. So like if you looked back, there was this person like scurrying, like zigzagging.
Nope.
Oh yeah,
that's how you get booted.
It lives rent free in my head. And that's the last time I did anything that was a haunted house affiliated thing. So anyway, the empath lady Allie was doing the headphones thing, and said that the voice she was hearing had no hope, and she started crying. And then when she left the building, she said, I don't know what happened in there, but I'm drained. One guy, the geologist guy, was having like fundamental problems with the empath lady because she also believed in like the power of crystals and different rocks. And he's a geologist, so he got like super fired up about it. So he's like looking through
That's just
this,
like a funny combination of people to have together.
It was pretty entertaining, but he had this like encyclopedia of crystals or whatever the hell that she brought, and she was like, see? And so he's like, oh, like, let's look at this. And it's like supposed to bring harmony to relationships. So why don't we just give these rocks to everybody who wants to get divorced? And the other guys on the team were like, okay, man, come on. Like,
don't be that guy.
Right, exactly. And she had said in the beginning, she was like, okay, like, I know it sounds crazy to you, but like, I grew up with this. Like, my whole family follows this tradition. Mm-hmm. So like, I know it sounds crazy to you, but it doesn't sound crazy to me.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, like somebody getting the Eucharist probably sounds crazy to her, but
I mean, try to explain that to somebody who's never heard of Christianity or Catholicism. Like, oh, well, it's the transformation of bread and wine into the body, the flesh and the blood of Jesus Christ. Excuse me?
Yeah, no, thank you.
And you eat it then, but you're not cannibals?
Right.
And also for why?
Yes. What is this doing for me?
Yeah.
At least the other ones, they're telling me it's going to bring me to fucking harmony.
That's true.
If I put this rock on my forehead.
It's true.
What am I getting from sucking down this communal cup of blood?
Vampire powers. Duh. It's like you didn't even watch True Blood.
That's one that we should have like a
that would be a good
on, because wow.
That would be a good one, especially because now PK's on thin ice that Joe Manganiello is single. So
and man, is there some good Joe Manganiello content in True Blood.
So good.
And Alexander Skarsgård.
Honestly, I really don't usually go for like the tall, thin guys, but yeah, he can get it.
I don't either, but man,
he grew on me.
And in the books, I loved Eric.
I only read the first book. I should get the other books because I can like devour like a young adult novel. And like, I know that they're cheesy as fuck, but like, I don't care.
Just
like, ultimately I'm just reading. Like, I've been reading like
garbage.
Those shitty, like, this is so embarrassing.
I love it. I can't wait. I mean, I've read 11 Sookie Stackhouse books, so.
Fair. Like recently though?
No.
Yeah, there it is. So.
But also not as a teenager. I was like in my 20s.
So I'm sure that you've gotten the ads on Facebook, but for like those Gality books or something, it's like basically like werewolf porn, like where have you been, mate, and like all this shit. And I was like, okay, like let me see, whatever. So like I download it, and I've just been like reading these like bullshit wolf smut.
So that episode that we had,
it was before I read it.
That makes it even better.
Yeah.
That you
at least I wasn't
foreshadowed
like,
it.
Low key telling on myself.
Yeah, no, this is just like,
no, I've just been like reading them, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like it's better than scrolling Instagram endlessly. So whatever. They're terribly written and edited. I think they're all fan fiction.
The Sookie Stackhouse books are not literature.
I mean, neither was Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey, and I still read all those.
I have not read either of those. I haven't seen Twilight, haven't read Twilight.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we should put that on our list.
You know why? Is because when those came out, I was very into vampires, but I was into like Anne Rice vampires. Which are definitely like the more sophisticated of the vampires.
And you weren't interested in Robert Pattinson's wonky nipple?
I was not.
Huh, that's weird.
No, the sparkling vampire thing did not do anything for me. So I continued to read Anne Rice books, which I loved, still love, and did not read any of the Twilight. To me, that seemed like vampire light, and I wanted like
vampire dark.
Yeah. I can't believe you've been reading werewolf porn.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait for this episode to come out.
It's gonna be so embarrassing.
Can this be called Werewolf Porn Part 2? Even though it's a Part 3 and they're
Smutty
not related.
Confessions.
Where we're talking about a haunted asylum.
Yes. But yeah, so anyway, the geologist got really fired up about the crystals and stuff.
Really
on night 5, because remember they're there for 2 weeks.
Oh my God, that's so long.
It's so long. It was like an hour and a half. Like it was a full-length documentary, this show. So on night 5, 3 of the team members went into one of the tunnels to do a spirit box session. A spirit box is the device that scans radio stations to allow the spirits to manipulate the radio frequencies so that it can speak in real time. It's really noisy, so if you ever hear it on a ghost hunting show that you're watching, it'll sound like and then like the word comes out. But it apparently does work if you believe that it in that kind of thing. So during this session though, one of the investigators, she had a camera sitting next to her on a bench, like it was fully on the bench. And somebody was sitting kind of like diagonally across from her on another bench on the other wall of the tunnel. And they were both filming, but the guy sitting across from her was videotaping and saw this camera get pushed off of the bench. Like she was facing the other direction and it just got fully pushed off the bench onto the ground, which was pretty wild. And then Mr. Geologist Science Guy got tapped on the hip pretty forcefully by an unseen entity and then didn't want to stay in the tunnel anymore. They were also getting a lot of activity. Yeah. He's like,
I'm not a geologist.
What sort of crystals stop people from touching me?
I've had a change of heart very recently.
Don't ask questions. The why is not important. And they were getting a lot of activity from a REM pod, which is the thing that lights up and beeps when theoretically it's being interacted with by a spirit. So usually you'll also see it where they'll do like a yes or no game where they'll say to the spirit, make this light up if your answer is yes, or do nothing if the answer is no, and you can like kind of ask questions and get feedback and have like an intelligent conversation, quote unquote, with these spirits. So they had this REM pod, the thing lights up, the beeping noise. It's apparently triggered by these electromagnetic waves. So they realized though that this thing kept going off and it would even go off when they were in their tent outside of these buildings. But they realized that it was triggered by their two-way radios that they were using to communicate with each other. So they created a Faraday cage, which, if anyone doesn't know, it's a metal cage that deflects radio frequencies so they don't interfere with whatever is inside the cage. There was one on What We Do in the Shadows a few seasons ago when they thought they had Guillermo trapped in their basement.
Oh, that's right. And he was just opening the door every day
and cleaning up after them.
And they were feeding him like raw chicken.
Yes.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
But it's this cage. They made this. They had wire, like metal wire. It looked like graph paper, like it was like chicken wire. Mm-hmm. And they built a cage with this like PVC framing, so it was just a cube. And they put the REM pod inside of it and were able to discover, as soon as they closed the cage on top of the REM pod and like hit the button on their radios, the REM pod didn't react anymore. So it actually did like block that additional frequency. So they were able then to use that to do further investigations. But that same kind of thing that you were talking about with ghost hunters, where they would like eliminate the potential cause for what, like try to figure out the explanation.
Right.
So like
your
wow,
pipes
there's
are
like
knocking and that's
right,
what's
like
happening, or...
there's a shit ton of activity on this floor. Like what the hell is going on? Well, we do in the Faraday cage, and then we're getting less like constant responses all the time.
Right.
Because at one point they were like running back and forth between like 2 different rooms because it kept going off, but it was because of their radios.
Meanwhile, the ghosts are watching them like, these fucking idiots.
Right. So this like when we were talking before about the SLS camera, they were in the bathroom of one of the buildings and they were asking questions and they were looking at the SLS camera and they saw a full, like, it looked like a stick figure there across the room, and they're talking to it and the guy was like, can you raise one hand? And one arm goes up, and he's like, can you raise your other hand? And the other arm goes up, and they were like, oh my fucking God, like what the hell? And so
can you wave him around like you just don't care?
Oop, there it is. So it was a guy and a girl, and the woman that was there was recording, and she was like, oh, can you tell us your name? Can you tell us why you're here? Da da da. And she played it back to herself, and she heard running water, and they realized the figure they saw was standing in a shower.
I hate this.
Yeah, it was wild. So then also, though, it was kind of for me, it raised the question of like, okay, was it like an intelligent response, or was the person just showering and like getting water on themselves? Because she got a recording of running water that sounded like a shower. So I don't know. Great assault, I guess. At a different point, all 5 investigators were in a room, and they had 2 REM pods inside the Faraday cage, and they were all sitting in a circle around the cage. Allie, the sensitive, said that she felt like the area next to her was getting super duper cold. So she started measuring the temperature with a digital thermometer, and it dropped like 10 degrees within like 30 seconds. And at the same time, one of the guys, Austin, said that he felt like somebody was like on his back. And then he was like, they're all sitting cross-legged, but he was like leaning forward, like someone was actually pushing down. And he was like, no, I feel like somebody's like standing on me and like pushing my shoulders down. And then he got like super lightheaded and started dry heaving and said he felt like he was about to throw up. And then he was like, I have to get out of this building. I have to get out of here. And he basically had to get like carried out, like with his arm over somebody's shoulder to like help him out. And they were like, they had producers with them, and one of the producers was like, okay, we're calling the medic. And
the medic was like, I don't want to fucking go in there. Don't call me.
The medic met them outside the building. But he started running outside the building saying he needed to get out of there. The producers called a medic. And then once he was out of the building, he was like, I mean, I feel okay, but not okay. And I keep feeling okay, but I'm not okay. And like, they were just like walking with him and like making sure like they kept track of him. The medic, basically he was like having a panic attack. Like it was very clear, like he could not catch his breath. The medic was evaluating him and said that his pulse was double what it was supposed to be. He was like shaking and couldn't stop shaking. The 2 women who apparently were both, one, Allie, was the more sensitive one, but they're both in the sensitive medium-ish world. They posited that he might have been on the verge of possession, if he was not yet completely possessed.
Oh, thank you.
And the medic later on was like, no, like when I got to you, you were like if you hadn't calmed down, you probably would have been on the verge of seizures. Your blood pressure was way too high. So like he was like, I don't think you should go back in there tonight.
I'd be like, oh no, are you sending me home?
Well, so then after this happened,
with someone, because I don't want to be by myself right
now. I need a chaperone.
Yes, I might need a chaperone after we finish this episode.
Well, I was watching all this last night before bed.
I am so amazed.
And PK wasn't here. I was home alone.
Not a chance. Nope.
Coco will, as much as she eats my hands, she will also fuck up anybody. She almost took out PK last night when he came home. She was big mad that somebody came into the house while we were upstairs.
Bernie will fully charge and scream at whoever it is. He will be afraid of them when he arrives, but he makes a for effort.
Coco would scare me. Her bark is like the bark of a Doberman.
Yeah.
She's just 50 pounds and small.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, so at the start of the show, they had talked briefly with Dr. Jim Conroy, the guy who had done that tracking of the success of Pennhurst residents after they were released. And they talked to him again towards the end of the experience after it was like I think day 12 they talked to him, and they were there for 14 days. So it was after Austin had this like near possession experience. So when they're talking to Dr. Conroy, they mentioned what happened the first night with the guy who said the name Jim and mentioned being friends. And they said to Dr. Conroy that they think the spirit was talking about Dr. Jim Conroy being their friend because he like worked so hard to prove that these people, you know, deserve to be treated like people.
Oh my God.
And he was like really touched by that. And he was just like, you know, if I could have made, you know, any impact, you know, I hope I did, and all that stuff. It was just very sweet. But he also thought that the possession of Austin was actually just somebody who was desperate for human touch and connection. And because Austin had kind of like opened himself up to that, that's why this person like literally latched onto him.
Oh my God.
So at the end, like their last night there, Austin went back to that room alone, and he like had this talk and was like, you know, I just want you to know that you deserve love. And, you know, if you want a hug, I'm happy to give that to you. And, you know, I'm sorry that you didn't get enough hugs when you were here, and and like just had this whole thing. And he's like, when he left, he was like, I felt like peaceful when I left, like I could take a deep breath. So it was just interesting the way that all ended. But, yeah, that was wild. And, you know, I just feel like no discussion of ghosts could be complete without discussing Ghost Adventures, which is hosted, if you don't know, by Zach Bagans. He owns the Zach Bagans Haunted Museum in Vegas. He really loves very tight black t-shirts and baggy Jinko black jeans. And talks like this.
I'm looking him up right now. I'm trying to see if I know who he is. Oh, that's a look.
It is very 2002 Hot Topic.
It reminds me of like Chris Angel, like really leaning into. Okay, weird overlap. As I'm Googling, I did Google images.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know he was, I don't know if he still is or how, let me see how old this is.
You saying Holly Madison?
Yeah.
Yeah, still.
As far wild. As I know.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, that's relatively recent. I think since the pandemic, but yeah.
2019.
Mm-hmm.
How weird.
Yeah, Zach Bagans and Holly Madison are in love.
Oh, wait, no. They broke up.
Oh.
They're not in love anymore. Unless they got back together.
For the best. So
I'm not familiar with this guy.
He is usually extremely antagonistic to ghosts. It's like kind of what he's known for.
Yeah.
He'll like yell and make noise. Like I watched an episode not about Pennhurst, but he was like he like found like a baseball bat in whatever place they were in, and so he was like, oh, I'm the warden and I want people to follow my rules, and like started hitting the baseball bat on stuff.
I hate him.
And it's just the kind of thing like, so apparently also on And That's Why We Drink, with their tours, they investigate a haunted location and then like present their results from their haunted investigations in their live tours. Mm-hmm. So their last tour, the Here for the Booze tour, that was supposed to happen in 2020 and then like only just recently finished because it got postponed so many times. They investigated the Queen Mary, which is docked permanently in LA. And they had like made a reservation for the room. I don't remember the room number. I think it's room 205, but it's the most haunted room on the ship.
I've seen like other things involving that.
Right. And so they made the reservation like well in advance so they could make sure to have this room in particular be their room to stay in. So they had this reservation for room 205. And their assistant called the day before to confirm the reservation, and they were told no, your reservation's been canceled. And she was like, no, it hasn't. Like, this is the confirmation number. Basically, it got canceled because Zach Bagans like stormed in and demanded that be the day that he do his investigation on the Queen Mary, in that room in particular. So they had to go a day later, like, and that's why We Drink had to go a day later because they got booted from their room by Zach Bagans and the Ghost Adventures crew. And so they had to leave early because the room was so antagonized by Zach being there and the shit that he pulls that they were like, we can't stay here. Like, this is too much. It's way too much, way too aggressive. So
and that's awful because I feel like, even though, I'm obviously like a fence sitter with this, I remember watching a Ghost Hunters where they were at an old plantation house and you could just tell that some of what was there because there was so much trauma tying them to that place, and they were just like stuck in that. So it's just the thought of like this douche coming in and just like flaring everything up by like triggering them almost. It's just gross.
Yes. And it's part of the controversy of him and his show is that that's what he does. And it's why I didn't want to lead with the Ghost Adventures episode because the other two episodes I mentioned were more about like making sure that they respect the history and the residents who lived and died there. And so anyway, Zach Bagans and the Ghost Adventures crew, they were in the Mayflower building when they asked the ghost to talk into the red light on an EVP recorder in Zach's hand, which then in real time, the investigators heard a girl's voice say hello, which was recorded, which you could also hear on like the regular cameras. And then the EVP recorded a different voice saying, "What are you doing?" So immediately after this, Zach said he got chills through his whole body and their digital thermometer showed a 10-degree drop in temperature within less than 30 seconds. So they set up a toy doll and a camera, which they never went back to. So,
oh, good. That's good investigating.
They also heard footsteps in real time, and there was an EVP captured of somebody saying "get out" in response to Zach saying, "We're here in the Mayflower building." So, get out.
Also me as a ghost.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here.
When they were in the tunnels under the buildings, they caught some pretty substantial bangs that could not be explained. And there's nobody else. Like when they get locked in, the thing with Ghost Adventures is like, they literally locked us into the building. And like, so there's a chain on the door and we can't leave until they come back in the morning to let us out.
Like at Shutter Island.
Yeah, except for worse because he's a douchebag. So while they're in the tunnel, they also got an EVP that was like crystal clear of a guy saying "sweet," and it was so clear. Like so often EVPs sound like and this was like sweet, like he was playing Candy Crush. Like,
that's funny. What if that's what it was? What if it's just like
it was a more recent ghost?
Yeah, it was like somebody who like worked security that died in some like weird way, and they're just sitting there like playing Candy Crush. Oh, that's great.
Later on, they're in a building called the Rockwell Building, and a rock was thrown at Zach, and it exploded when it hit the wall. At the same time, they caught an EVP of somebody hissing.
Ew, I don't love that.
Which hissing was also reported in a couple of the other episodes I saw as well. Like they heard people in real time, or they got EVPs of people hissing. Zach also reported that he felt somebody grab his pocket around the same time he saw a white orb on the night vision camera he was holding. They set up a camera on a tripod to leave there, and about 15 minutes after they left, they caught the sound of somebody trying to open a door. It wasn't caught on camera, it was just the audio, but it was like the sound of like jiggling a door.
The handle, yeah.
Yeah, horrible. They also used a infrared camera with an eyepiece that it made him look, I said, like he was wearing Google Glass or like was LeVar Burton in Star Trek and had like that headband over his eyes.
Jordy.
Yeah. But the purpose of it was that the eye thing would display on the screen, apparently, the word that was being conveyed by the spirits. So they asked, "What did you do here?" and got the word hit. And then as they were walking around, on camera, Zach gets smashed with this huge coat rack, like this solid wood coat rack, that looked like the one from Beauty and the Beast. Like it's like the pole that like stands up. And the hooks hit him in the chest, like really, like right under his nipple. Like he had these like red marks. And like it hit him, and he was like, "What the fuck?" Because it blew past one of the guys on his team, because there's only 3 of them. It blew past the guy who was filming Zach as he got hit with this coat rack.
It's
so like,
so
and he said like, "I felt it go past me, but like it was like too fast." And so then they review the footage of walking into that room initially, and they see the coat rack, and it's like laying against a wall on a corner, but like fully leaned against it. And it was like solid oak or whatever. And so he was so dramatic about it. He was like, "This is so heavy. It would have had to have gotten picked up, and we didn't hear it dragging, and it harpooned me at my heart." It was
I just
so
love
dramatic.
how intentional it is that it goes past another person, whooshes past another person, and hits this asshole.
It harpooned him.
I mean, you know what? Good word. That's a very.
It was why I was caught off guard by it so much, because it was so dramatic. And then
just such a like chef's kiss, like,
yeah. And normally at the end of each of these episodes, they'll like summarize stuff. A lot of times they'll like review a lot of their footage with the property owners or whatever. The property owners didn't probably give a shit what he found, because they have a booming business.
Yeah.
But
so like, yeah, we know.
Yeah, right.
Also, we own this and we deal with it all the time.
Right, exactly. And then when that happened, they asked who did this, and they got an invitation or an EVP of a girl saying, or an EVP saying the girl. So
Good.
they said, "Who did this?" And the response was the girl.
Good.
So yeah, normally at the end of their episodes they do this summary, but they were basically like, "I think the best proof is the coat rack." It's like, yes, Zach, we get it. You were personally victimized by the ghost. Like,
and we
Jesus
all enjoyed
Christ.
it, as did this whole community of spirits that are here.
And then finally, I hopped on Reddit to see what Reddit had to say about Pennhurst and the hauntings. And there were actually some decent threads. There were some people who were like, "I work there, ask me anything," or, you know, "I went there and this is the photo I got. What do you think?" Da da da. So apparently someone on Reddit who says that they work at Pennhurst doing ghost tours said that there's an overnight ghost hunt you can do if you want. I guess it's kind of pricey, like $100, but you're there from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. You would get to investigate 2 whole buildings, 2 tunnel systems, and you get a tour of the grounds. And that's separate from the haunted house thing that they do during Halloween. Other people on Reddit reported feeling that they were being watched all the time while they were there. And some people shared some pictures that captured orbs. And I'm going to send you these pictures.
Oh, good. The orbs have always been like I don't know. That's always one that I'm like.
I will say there was in the Ghost Adventures episode when Zach says that he saw something, you know, a white figure, blah, blah, blah.
Am I looking at whore with the X, or am I looking at the orb?
The orb just in this one. And then, but Zach said, like, it's very easy to think that this is just dust, but the difference with dust is that it will, it travels like in a single direction across your screen. So when it changes, if the orb changes direction, that's how you can differentiate it from a grain of dust that's just caught in front of your lens. Which I thought was like useful information. Not that it's impossible for, you know, wind to happen and like make something change directions, but I think it is a little bit easier to kind of like explain that away. And then the same person who took that orb picture also took this picture and said, the cars were in a field that was fenced off that you could not get to, and that there was nobody in the cars when she took the photo. or when they took the photo. I don't know their pronouns. But if you look inside the front window of that red Beetle,
Yep.
there's a head.
Yeah,
I
don't
think.
love that. Yeah.
So there were some replies that were like, that's just the front seat. And I was like, maybe, but also maybe not. I don't know. I also, at least based on that picture, and we'll post it to our stories for this episode, but it looks like whoever's in the car is like looking up at the camera,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
which is, I think, what's more unsettling about it. Like,
yep.
If it was just a car seat, I don't think it would have the eye shadows and stuff. But yeah, so there's a bunch of different stories on Reddit, and yeah, so obviously I think the place is for sure haunted. The banging especially, I feel like, was like particularly unsettling.
To me, it's always the voices that got me. That's always what I found to be like the most frightening, is like the auditory component.
Especially when you can hear it in real time and you don't need this like EVP shit with like enhance. Because I do get skeptical, and I understand where PK is coming from, where it's like just somebody in the other room like mumbling stuff. Like, if I can't discern what's being said without subtitles, I really question how they identified it as words in the first place. But there was a lot of EVPs that were just very crystal clear. And when they play back the EVP, you can hear the human talking in real time, the one who's doing the recording, and then the EVP, and then people talking again. And there's a genuine difference in how it sounds. So it's just one of those things where between that and then the music box, for sure, I was like, no, thank you. Nope. Unsubscribe.
Yeah, I don't like that information. No.
Yeah, it was wild. But yeah, that's the history of Pennhurst and the ghosts of Pennhurst.
Well, thanks for that nightmare fuel, Katie.
You're welcome. That's great. And if you want to do a ghost tour, you can check that out. I think it's hauntedpennhurst.com or something. And just try to be respectful when you go. I'll say that. It did seem like the people who were running the ghost tours, who were like showing the investigators around the properties, truly cared about what happened to the people that lived there and their stories. So,
like whether or not you believe in it is important.
Exactly. And I think, there's a way to, I understand the realities of sometimes getting people to care about disability rights and stuff, means that they need to see that, like, oh, it was all the suffering, like it was all the pulling people's teeth out and tying them to beds that makes these people, their spirits or their energies, trapped here for whatever reason. And I do disagree with the haunted house thing. I get it. I mean,
capitalism.
Yeah. Gonna do a capitalism about it, and that's just all there is to it. So but yeah, it was a really interesting story, and there was a lot of lawsuits. So I glommed onto that, of course. But also I was really surprised at how much Willowbrook affected Pennhurst. Yeah. And I think it was also very interesting overall that there was that Christmas in Purgatory photo essay, but it's the kind of thing where, I think it was in the original Bill Baldini expose, they talked to somebody from Pennsylvania Arc, and I'm pretty sure they said, like, people just don't care and they don't want to care. And I think that it's very easy to look away and to say, well, that's somebody else's problem to figure out. And I think as Vice President Hubert Humphrey said, we're a great country and a rich country, and there's no excuse. anything less than good is shameful. So,
and I mean, we're just looking at 2 of how many hundreds of these facilities existed that followed the same path of like being this isolated dumping ground for humans.
right.
I think like at one point in Willowbrook they called it like a human warehouse because there was just people getting dumped there.
Yes.
And overcrowding and underfunding and understaffing and, you know, that bad barrel situation where it's not like there's just a few bad people involved. Like the situation itself is a breeding ground for all of these things that followed.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, when this comes out, we'll be barreling closer and closer to 2024. And I think it's, you know, worth remembering that when people talk about cutting taxes and all that, they're cutting funding to things like this. They're cutting funding to places like Pennhurst and Willowbrook. You know, funding for people who need funding, whose lives depend on getting any funding whatsoever.
Or states when they cut Medicaid. This is the type of things that wind up happening.
Right, exactly. And you know, so I would encourage you to contact your legislators now, particularly if they're up for re-election next year, and get on their back about it. And don't let them forget and assume that just because something like this happened, you know, and closed 36 years ago means
which
that
is so recent.
Yeah. Like
so recent.
Almost my entire life.
Yeah.
In fact, exactly my entire life, this thing has been closed. Sorry, brain fart.
I mean, it's close, but who could tell?
Not me. But yeah, you know, my entire life this thing has been closed, but that doesn't change the fact that you know, 1,300 people in 2010 were still in similar type settings, and potentially because they need to be, but that doesn't change the fact that we need to also be ensuring that they are getting the type of care that they deserve, and they're not being you know, inhumanely treated, and they're not being denied education, and that they are being paid minimum wage if they're being asked to create these vocational projects. So
I mean, look at Willowbrook. There was people who, you know, when New York Times investigated in like 2020, had survived Willowbrook, were in a group home setting, and were still facing physical abuse. There was still like how many abuse claims?
Exactly.
So I mean, it's you know, again, like the system itself needs funding and improvement and investment. I mean, if we're not investing in people, what are we doing?
I don't know.
Fucking capitalism, man.
But yeah, that's all I got. Happy Halloween.
That was great. And also, thanks for scaring me.
You're welcome. I was hoping to help you go into labor so that you could be comfortable again. But
listen, if that works, I'll watch whatever I have to.
You might end up getting that desperate shortly.
Yes, I'm not far off.
But yeah, so next time you hear us, it'll be episode 65. Holy moly. And until then, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Threads at The Bar is Ankle High. We have merch at bit.ly/anklehighmerch. We are on Patreon at patreon.com/The Bar is Ankle High. This comes out November 2nd, which means I don't know if you'll be back by then. Probably close.
That's probably around when I'll be coming back.
So join our Patreon, support us. Otherwise, Garrett will have to go back to work sooner than expected because the podcast can't support her lifestyle.
Especially me.
Yeah, think of the children.
Or me. Just think
just think of me. Just think of me.
Just think of me and how much my dogs want me to be home.
Yeah. And how much my cats require constant attention.
Yeah. I'm literally petting my dogs
and then also
as we're doing
constant
this.
being ignored.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mostly talking to you, Sophie.
There's a cat on a chair. There's a cat on a... Oh, no, that's Kiki. And then Cole's up there, and Sophie's probably on the dining room table on my clean towel.
That's nice of her to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's great. I think I'm going to go fill up my swimming pool and
that's a great idea.
Have a little dip.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, because I don't have any more stuff to do today. And that's all I got. In the meantime, remember preservingpennhurst.org for more information about Pennhurst and helping them to establish the National Museum for Disability History. And maybe cut back on the number of medium tight black shirts with Janko jeans you wear.
With thick rimmed glasses.
Yeah, while antagonizing ghosts. Just consider it.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah, because the bar is ankle high. Bye.
Bye.